白頭浪默含淚光衝往西外，黑眼睛觀看歷史哀怨跌宕，紅日光正義藏在星宿背後，誰在笑長夜伴着罪惡放蕩？萬劫不改的眼光，拿着大鮮血罪狀，用最好看的不告狀。哪怕像螳螂橫着臂，對坦克猶如煉鋼，為國家我捨身去當。天有光，夕陽在催促要靠岸。風有聲，傾聽默想怎去破浪。明或暗，信念如舊清澈恬靜。寒或暖，赤了丹心流過血汗。萬勸不改的國邦，拿着鐵腕與慾望，磨了罪惡的刀對望。你已在悠悠長夜裏，習慣欺壓與暴漢，忘掉地獄的火有多燙。民主會戰勝歸來，民主會戰勝歸來，白髮斑斑情義深似海。讓化石仍殘存着愛，一刻霸佔的青苔，鋪天蓋蓋不住世代。民主會戰勝歸來，民主會戰勝歸來，後有巨浪承接這變改。若世上仍流傳着愛，即使遠近斗室內，我自由與天地同在。萬劫不改的眼光，拿着大鮮血罪狀，用最好看的不告狀。我摘下和平旗幟，我只佔勝為號角，浪與花互擁於。
Good evening. Tanks and troops are patrolling the streets of central Peking after the bloody operation to crush student-led protests. Some reports say more than 2,000 civilians were killed in last night's army assault on Tiananmen Square.
The first move came. A lone armoured personnel carrier weaved its way around Tiananmen Square, establishing for the first time in 3 weeks an effective government claim to the place. But it was a near-run thing. The diehards among the students had chosen to take up their position around the monument in the middle of the square. All we could hear and see of their fate was the tracer bullets and the sound of heavy guns used against them. The army, ignoring the burning buses which served as barricades, was implacable. They moved in on the square from several directions, including the Forbidden City itself. Soon the soldiers had cleared the main east-west avenue that runs through Tiananmen Square, cleared it by the deliberate use of random firepower. The statue to democracy, erected in the last week of the students' occupation of the square as a symbol of their aspirations, has been entirely destroyed.
The bicycle rickshaws scooped up the injured. Others were shunted onto bikes and pedaled to hospital. Many were carried away by frantic local residents. Ambulances screamed up to the troop line and were turned away. They couldn't get to the square. 2 ambulance drivers were shot and injured. Early scene of near mayhem. Casualties were arriving every few seconds. On bikes, rickshaws, park benches, carried in. All with gunshot wounds. The operating theatre was overflowing, many of the staff in tears. In 20 minutes, 40 seriously injured were brought for emergency surgery. 2 were already dead.
The daylight hours have seen more violence, with young people still determined to show their defiance, facing the lines of troops and tanks. On the main road east of the square at 10:23 this morning, there was a sudden and deadly volley from the troops. The crowd ran, and bodies were left lying in the road. The lines of troops across the entrance to the square regrouped as the injured were raced away on any available transport. The burnt later, again with no reason or warning, the troops opened fire again. Between 30 and 40 people were killed by the two volleys. And all day, reports have come in that the main Peking University, Beida, on the city's outskirts, has had troops on the campus. They've been searching everywhere and beating and killing.
1989年天安門六四屠殺鎮壓之後，香港維園嘅燭光就一直都係中國民主運動嘅燈塔。2019年香港爆發反送中運動，血腥鎮壓亦都由長安大街伸向彌敦道。維園嘅燭光亦都喺2020年開始被迫熄滅。香港一直都被視為商業同埋金錢掛帥嘅都會。但其實維園嘅燭光先至係香港人真正嘅精神面貌。30年嚟，香港人擇善固執、頑強不屈，代表公義同埋良知嘅燭光，由黑髮守到白頭，成傳嘅火炬亦由父母交俾兒女，又再交俾第三代。今年係六四32週年，亦都係維園燭光被滅2週年。本土嘅香港人雖然失去咗悼念六四嘅自由，但係海外嘅香港人32年嚟一直緊守崗位，同香港人並肩作戰。我哋承諾為自由同抗爭，必定延續維園燭光。維園嘅燭光唔單止係和平理性嘅力量，更加係好似民主會戰勝歸來嘅歌詞所講。點點嘅燭光，就如萬劫不改的眼光，拿着大鮮血罪狀，用最浩瀚的筆告狀。海外嘅香港人會記錄港共政府嘅每一筆血債同埋罪行，我哋更加會紀念每一個在囚嘅手足同埋朋友。我哋將以同樣嘅固執同埋頑強，喺國際社會上面聲討中國共產黨嘅罪行，救援在囚嘅政治犯。維園嘅香港人可以為素未謀面嘅北京學生同埋市民持守30年。今日超過30萬嘅加拿大香港移民，你哋睇到呢個城市嘅淪陷，睇到數以萬計老中青三代嘅香港人受害同埋受苦，咁你哋又將會點樣係重塑香港人嘅精神面貌呢？又將會點樣係向國際社會表明我哋自己嘅心志呢？毋忘天安門六四，永記香港612。請喺呢個網上集會之後參加你哋當地嘅六四燭光集會。6月12號多倫多嘅車隊遊行，同埋溫哥華嘅快閃活動。今晚8點，同埋6月12日見。
一世上仍流傳着愛，即使遠近斗室內，我自由與天地同在，我自由與生命同在。
My name is Mabel Tang, and I represent Vancouver Society in support of democratic movement. I welcome you to join us in our Canada-wide online commemorative rally. 32 years ago in 1989, the people of China protested against the corruption of the Chinese Communist Party. Their voices were silenced. The protests were brutally crushed in a bloody massacre in Tiananmen Square on June 4th. Since 2019, the people of Hong Kong have been protesting against the encroachment of human rights and the erosion of the rule of law by the Chinese Communist Party. Their voices were silenced by mass arrest and imprisonment. Their protests were brutally crushed by the extreme violence of the police. In 1997, the year Hong Kong was handed over to Communist China, Hong Kong Alliance late chairman Sito Hua took comfort that Hong Kong remained the only place in all of China that could still commemorate June 4. But after only 23 years, this last symbol of freedom of assembly and freedom of speech has been taken away, using COVID-19 pandemic as a pretext. The Victoria Park Candlelight Vigil, attended by tens of thousands each year, was banned since 2020. This year, anyone gathering the vigil will face up to 5 years in prison or 1 year for promoting it. Overseas Chinese must take up the task to ensure that the memories of the pioneer who sacrificed in the fight for democracy will not be lost. Tonight, we remember not only those slaughtered in Tiananmen Square in 1989, we also remember hundreds, perhaps thousands of young protesters murdered in the streets of Hong Kong since 2019. Let us light our candles once again and vow that these candles will lit for many, many more years to come. Thank you.
I'm Pan Yok Tong, representing Movement for Democracy in China, Calgary. Our work is to promote the core values of culture and morality of our former China and to help people differentiate the good from the evil. It is against our traditional culture to break a promise. It is immoral to kill civilians with heavy arms. It is tyrannical to suppress freedom of expression. And it is evil to politically persecute the pro-democracy activists. This is why we support Hong Kongers who have been fighting for their rights. Hong Kongers, you are not alone. We stand with you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. Never forget June 4th has been our rallying cry for the last 32 years. This annual remembrance is an ongoing struggle against silencing, erasing, and forgetting. It has also been a movement of resistance against an authoritarian regime which occupied Tibet, ordered tanks against its own people, committed genocides against the Uyghurs, and now in the name of national security, imprisoned pro-democracy activists and abrogated the one country, two system international treaty for Hong Kong. So today we say, free all political prisoners in Hong Kong and in China. Today we also remember and salute the bravery of Wang Weiling, who stood in front of a column of army tanks on Chang'an Street, and the bravery of the thousands of Hong Kong protesters in the 2019 movement. From Tiananmen Square to Victoria Park, from Hong Kong to the world, we vow to stand and speak truth to power. The light of justice, democracy, and freedom will prevail. Now we'd like to take a moment of silence to honor and remember the students, workers, and everyday citizens who were killed in the Tiananmen massacre. We also remember Liu Xiaobo and the many Tiananmen mothers who passed away over the years, never getting a chance to publicly mourn the death of their loved ones. We remember and we resist. 现在我们请大家为六四的死难者，为所有曾经为了争取民主以牺牲的人士 做默哀1分钟。这个追思也代表了我们对民主运动的一份坚持，人在心在，燭光不滅。現在我想請大家，我哋一齊為6·4死難者，為所有曾經為爭取民主而犧牲嘅人士默哀1分鐘。呢個追思都代表咗我哋對民主運動嘅堅持。人在心在，燭光不滅。
There are dates on your calendar you will never forget. I just go through so much emotion this time every year. It's been that way, and sometimes I cry, and sometimes I'm angry. But when I think of a young man flattened by a tank in Tiananmen Square, I think of his family today. Did he have a brother or sister? Are his parents still alive? Does anybody care? Well, I care. And I care about the thousands of families who were never allowed to mourn the deaths of their loved ones. I remember the students' smiling faces in the square on a warm spring day in May of 1989. I remember the citizens of Beijing embracing the pro-democracy student movement. I remember a city that felt liberated after tens of thousands entered the square, 100,000 strong. While they were there to ostensibly mourn the death of a former Communist Party leader, what they didn't know was a power struggle was taking place inside the walls of the Great Hall of the People. Communist Party Secretary Zhao Ziyang, who was sympathetic to the student cause, would lose that political struggle to the hardline Premier Li Peng. The rest is history, but it's a shameful history where the Chinese government killed its own people, young people in the prime of their lives. June 3rd and 4th are dates that I will never forget. How can you ever forget what you witnessed? This was the massacre in and around Tiananmen Square. I am haunted by those agonizing pictures of pain, of death, not only of the thousands who died, but the death of the ideal that perhaps there was a better way to govern. Today, we see a China where suppression of anything resembling rights is crushed. Today, the government doesn't need tanks to do it. It just does it. In the so-called autonomous region of Xinjiang, where the minority are persecuted by the government, where the government practices genocide against the Uyghur minority, in Tibet, where Buddhist voices are silenced, in Hong Kong, where the lights have dimmed on democracy. And now the menacing voice of a totalitarian government is getting louder in dealing with Taiwan. We live in dangerous times, but in dangerous times we must all speak out on human rights. In my reading of human rights, these are rights which belong to everyone in the world, from birth until death. We must speak out for those who don't have a voice. Basic rights on shared values like dignity, fairness, equality, respect, independence, values defined and protected by law. On a dusty avenue of a Beijing street 32 years ago, a voice from the dark said to me, "Tell the world what's going on here." I have said it again and again and again, but I am one voice. Where is yours?
This picture hung in my office in a place of honor throughout the years that I was in the Senate. The picture to me represents two things: the unspeakable atrocities that the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government committed against innocent people, mostly young, who gave their life because they believed in freedom, they believed in democracy. But it also, to me, represents the courage of the Chinese people. The tank man, he stood in front of tanks. These are the Chinese people, and they're still there. And it is for them that we also do this today, to remember that most Chinese want freedom, most Chinese want democracy, most Chinese want what most of the world actually has, which is the life where you can choose, the life where somebody doesn't tell you what to do, the life where you can live in peace, you can achieve, and you can succeed. The importance of this is that we must never forget. We must always keep the flame alive so that the world will not forget the thousands who were killed, but also the thousands of family members who each year have to remember that their son or their daughter or their husband or their wife or their friend gave their life for freedom, gave their life for peace. The importance of that is that it isn't only for China, but for the world to remember, so that we can pursue for all humanity the democratic values, the freedoms that one can have to choose and not to be enslaved by a state. The Chinese Communist Party, unfortunately, has not even learned that yet. It's still going on. I am horribly afraid of how far they're going to go in Hong Kong. They are now already being very aggressive in a way that people are losing their lives. Are we going to have another Tiananmen Square? Or worse indeed? The world is watching. But the Chinese Communist Party, and let's be clear, it's not the Chinese people themselves, they are the victims. The Chinese Communist Party is still committing acts which are not accepted worldwide against insolent people, even if it's just by denying them the right to be able to choose their lifestyle, to choose how they want to, how they want to conduct this themselves. They are denied that. And it is our job, ladies and gentlemen, yours, mine, and everybody else who believes in freedoms and democracy, to never let them forget. We will remember forever. Thank you.
尊敬的香港市民们、朋友们，我是天安门母亲群体代表胡丽红。今天，我代表天安门母亲群体，向你们致以最崇高的敬意和衷心的感谢。天安门六四惨案已经过去32年了，现在想起来仍历历在目。我丈夫陈森林就是在这次惨案中被无辜枪杀的。当时他是独自去的天安门，我在家里等了1夜未归，不知是被抓了还是打伤了。我和家里人在长安街附近医院寻找，一直没有找到。1个月后，在朋友的帮助下，在北京市委一堆的照片中认出了我的丈夫。 这些照片中的人都是各家医院没人认领的尸体照片。在天安门附近北京第4医院停尸房，我看见了我的丈夫，他左侧胸口盖着一块纱布。据医院知情人告知，他是惨案当晚被市民抢救出来，送到医院的时候已经死亡了。89年，我丈夫35岁，他出生在革命军人家庭，自己也曾入伍当过兵，转业后分配到北京保密工厂工作。我在北京一家医院从事医务工作。女儿当时只有8岁，上小学2年级。她爸爸的去世，我们家就像天塌了一样，一个幸福的3口之家被这突如其来的灾难毁灭了。女儿失去了父亲，妻子失去了丈夫，妈妈失去了儿子。当年婆婆带着儿子的骨灰回南方老家的情景，我永远忘不掉。生活上的困难、苦和累，我们都可以忍受和承担，而压抑了我们32年的心里的痛、心里的苦，没有地方去申诉。直到现在，我仍然不能理解，在和平年代，有什么事情一定要使用全副武装的军人、军车、坦克、真枪实弹，在首都北京街头，在长安街，在天安门广场，向手无寸铁的市民和学生开枪来解决吗？作为一个死难者家属，我坚定相信公道自在人间，6·4惨案必将能够得到公平公正的解决。我们天安门母亲群体每一个活着的和去世的成员都有一个共同的心愿，要求政府就当年的屠城惨案给难属们一个交代。我们提出的3项诉求给予解决：公布6·4惨案的真相，对于难属给予应有的赔偿，对当年责任者就屠城惨案追究其法律责任，还我们做人的尊严，还我们公道与正义。感谢香港市民对我们的一贯支持，感谢朋友们尊重生命、热爱和平、制止杀戮的信念与坚守。天安门母亲群体成员吴丽红，谢谢。